The Boy Who Painted the Sky, brought to you by Bravehat. Introducing Charlie Thompson, a 9-year-old boy. Creative boy with dreams of colorful skies. Mrs. Johnson, kind shopkeeper encouraging Charlie's dream. Mr. Higgins, skeptical baker who doubts Charlie's dream. Mr. Grayson, old blimp operator, cautious but supportive. Charlie lived in a small town where the skies were always dull and gray. To most people, the sky was just empty and lifeless. But Charlie was different. He didn't see gray skies. He saw so many possibilities. Most days, Charlie could be found on the grassy hill behind his house, sketching colorful pictures in his notebook. His drawings were wild and bright. Rainbows, swirling galaxies, and golden suns.
If only I could paint the sky.
He often whispered to himself. One afternoon, Charlie spotted a slow-moving blimp floating over the rooftops. Suddenly, an idea popped into his head.
What if I could paint that?
He said, his heart racing. He tore a page from his notebook and began sketching a machine that could spray paint on a blimp. It was a wild idea, but Charlie loved wild ideas. That evening, he sneaked into his father's shed. He dug through paint cans, pipes, and old tools.
This will work,
he said, pulling pieces together. By the time the moon rose, Charlie had built a small paint-spraying contraption. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The next day, Charlie ran to the busy town square carrying his invention and notebook. The square buzzed with life. Vendors selling bread and vegetables, kids playing, and neighbors chatting near the fountain. Climbing onto the edge of the fountain, Charlie called out,
"Everyone, I have an idea."
The crowd turned to look at him.
What if we could paint the sky? What if we could turn those boring gray clouds into a masterpiece?
He held up his notebook, showing colorful sketches of painted blimps floating in the sky. But instead of excitement, Charlie heard laughter. Paint the sky? With blimps? Mr. Higgins, the baker, said, shaking his head. "Dreams won't put food on the table," someone else muttered. Embarrassed, Charlie jumped down and walked away, clutching his notebook. But as he passed the paint shop, a kind voice stopped him.
"Charlie, wait!"
It was Mrs. Johnson, the friendly shopkeeper. She handed him a small can of blue paint and a brush.
"Don't let them stop you."
"The world needs dreamers like you." Charlie smiled.
Thank you,
he whispered, holding the paint can like a treasure. Back home, Charlie worked hard on his invention. He adjusted the nozzles, tested the sprayer, and practiced on an old balloon. By Saturday morning, he was ready. Charlie went to see Mr. Grayson, the man who owned the blimp.
Can I borrow your blimp for a project?
He asked nervously. Mr. Grayson raised an eyebrow but smiled.
"Just don't break it, lad."
As the blimp rose into the sky, Charlie's heart pounded. Carefully, he loaded the paint sprayer. The first spray was shaky, but soon red and orange streaks covered the blimp. Mr. Grayson observes the painting efforts with a thoughtful smile. By the time he finished, the blimp was a colorful mural of rainbows and stars. When the blimp floated back over the town square, everyone gasped. "Look at that!" Mrs. Johnson cheered. "It's beautiful," Mr. Higgins murmured, his earlier doubts forgotten. Children clapped and pointed as the colorful blimp floated above. Charlie's chest swelled with pride. Mr. Grayson, still in disbelief. Where did he learn how to paint a blimp? He wondered. The next day, inspired by Charlie's blimp, the townsfolk came together to paint more. Farmers brought buckets of paint. Kids fetched brushes. Mrs. Johnson helped get paint cans for the children. The children laugh as they paint colorful shapes on the blimps, their hands and faces covered in paint. Mrs. Johnson and Mr. Higgins share a happy laugh as they paint side by side. Mr. Higgins paints part of a blimp and hands out pastries to keep everyone energized. Charlie watches the villagers paint. Mr. Grayson smiles at Charlie and says, "I am so proud of you." Together they painted blimps with bright murals, sunsets, forests, animals, and patterns. For the first time in years, the gray skies were filled with life and color. On the last day, the mayor declared a festival in Charlie's honor. The town square shone with lights and banners. Music played as neighbors danced beneath their floating art gallery. Mrs. Johnson stands outside her shop, clapping her hands and pointing at the sky, her face lit up with joy. Her eyes glisten with tears of happiness as she watches the sky filled with blimps. Mr. Higgins leans against the doorframe of his bakery with a warm smile, watching the blimps float above. Mr. Grayson stands near a blimp's control panel on the ground, adjusting a lever while glancing at the sky with a mix of pride and satisfaction. The children in the town square are filled with excitement as the vibrant blimps reflect in their wide eyes. Charlie stood with his family, his cheeks red with excitement. As fireworks lit up the night sky, he whispered to his mother,
"I didn't just paint the sky, I painted hope."
His mother smiled, hugging him close. "And you brought the whole town together, Charlie." As the festival continued, Charlie looked up at the blimps. Their colors glowed even in the moonlight. He knew this was just the beginning of his journey as a dreamer and a builder of wonders. The Boy Who Painted the Sky, brought to you by Bravehat.